Hey friends, here we are to lesson 4 in our Love Everyone study. This series is all about the powerful Christian challenge we have to love everyone, which is impossible, right? You can't love everyone. It's just too many. So the temptation we have is to turn this challenge into a general fuzzy feeling kind of cliche. Yeah, I love everybody. I'm good with everyone. Everyone's great. First off, it's just not true, right? You're not good with everybody, and everyone isn't great. I mean, I'm not great. I can be pretty hard to love sometimes. But the bigger issue is this. That's not what this command was meant to be. It wasn't meant to be a general, fuzzy feeling about everyone. It was meant to be specific and practical action. So to get our minds and our hands around this, we've decided we're going to love everyone by loving one. Our strategy is to define who and how. Who is my one? How will I practically love them? To apply our strategy, we're defining people we are uniquely positioned to love. We started with family, then we talked about our church, and this week, something significant happens. We're widening the circle. Really, that's what we've done so far. Family represents close relationships around us. Church is a bit wider, but still represents people we have a lot in common with, beliefs and values and habits that we share. This week, we widen the circle a bit more. And some of us may find that as the circle widens, the challenge also grows. The one we want to talk about in this lesson is our neighbor. It's one of the most well-known of Jesus' teaching. In one of the books about Jesus' life, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, somebody asks Jesus, "Teacher, what's the greatest command?" And Jesus replies, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind." But then he adds, "And love your neighbor as yourself." We see this teaching of Jesus in various places in the Bible. And what's clear is this. Jesus wasn't saying, love God's the best thing and loving neighbor, it's the second best thing. What Jesus was really saying is the best way you can tell if you're loving God is if you are loving your neighbor. The idea of loving our neighbor is part of the greatest commandment Christians have been given, which causes us to ask a natural follow-up, right? Well, who is that? What do you mean by neighbor? If this is so important, I'm going to need some clarification. It's such a natural response. In fact, it's so natural, it's the very response someone threw at Jesus when Jesus gave this teaching. And Jesus then, to answer the question, tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, which I know many of you know, but rather than going through the story, let me just summarize Jesus' point. The gist of what Jesus said is this: anyone could be your neighbor. There really isn't a boundary so high that someone loses the capacity to be your neighbor. Jesus says what we've been saying, right? Love everyone. If this were the only spot we find this kind of teaching in the Bible, then maybe we could just make up our own definition of neighbor or argue how important it really is. But we find the teaching all over the books and the letters and the sections of the Bible we call the New Testament. So let's dig a little deeper and look at one of these. Check out 1 John chapter 4. 1 John 4, starting at verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Basically the same thing that Jesus said, right? The best way to love God is to love others. But then John says, this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son, that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice of sins. Okay, this is actually really helpful. We got to catch this. Of course, John says the best way you love God is loving others, but then he adds some clarity. God did this by drawing near. God showed us love by sending his Son, God in the flesh, into the world. God knew that love requires nearness, so God sent his Son to be with us. John's adding some clarity, and he adds even more if you go down to verses 19 through 21. John writes, we love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. So there he is reiterating, love God by loving others, But then he writes, whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. If you aren't loving who you can see, you aren't loving God whom you cannot see. Let's put these ideas together that John's given us. God drew near to us in Jesus. Jesus was close enough to see us. That's how he loved, and that's who he loved, the people he could see. If we want to love like God, we love the people who are near. We love the people we can see. That's our model for loving our neighbors. Who's near? Who can we lift up our eyes and see every day? There's a lady who walks her dog in my neighborhood every day. That's my neighbor. There's a guy I see at the gym every day. That could be a neighbor. There's a guy at Target who brings me a bag when my wife does a pickup order on our Target app, and when I ask how he's doing, he always says, "Just chillin'." Just chillin' guy is my neighbor. And I'd like to be his neighbor. Who doesn't need more just chillin' guy in their lives? We could go on and on. If you don't love who you can see, you aren't loving God, who you can't see. If we want to love like God, we love who is near. We love who we can see. Here's the word: proximity. The thing your neighbor has that makes them your neighbor is proximity. Proximity is a unique opportunity for loving presence. So we're getting our minds around the answer to the first question of who. Our strategy in this case is, who is our neighbor? The answer is the one you can see. The answer is all about proximity. So now we have to ask, how? Because it can't be general well-wishing. The teaching of the Bible insists that it's practical. Our who must have a how. Look at James 2:14-18. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but knows nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead. We could say what James wrote this way: a who without a how is not really the Christian faith. This story reminds me of something I'm seeing more and more today. Have you noticed that when something tragic happens in our world, and people want something done about it, they'll offer a criticism that goes something like, "Enough with thoughts and prayers. We need action." I've seen that so many times, and it kind of breaks my heart. The idea that thoughts and prayers aren't necessarily inextricably linked to action, well, that contradicts our faith. Like James encourages us here, when we see a neighbor in need, our love must get practical. Our who must have a how. We've heard from Jesus, and we've heard from John, and we've heard from James, but even Paul, who wrote most of the letters collected for us in the New Testament, he wrote about it too. When he wrote his letter to the Romans, he's headed for the home stretch to wrap up all the teachings he's been giving. And he writes this, Romans 13, verses 8-10. "Let no debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law, the commandments. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not commit murder. You shall not steal. You shall not covet." Whatever else you want to throw in there. They're all summed up in one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. When Paul talks about a debt in this scripture, he's not saying that we owe something to our neighbors. He's saying we owe something to Jesus, the one who drew near, who saw us in our need, and who gave his life for us. The way we display our gratitude, our love for Jesus, is we love our neighbors. In your group, you're going to do a deeper dive into the scriptures together and get a chance to talk about proximity. Who can you see? And you'll have the opportunity to get practical. How will I love them? I don't know what neighbor you're going to be led to love this week. Maybe it'll be fun, like showing some love to just chillin' guy. I could imagine that would be a lot of fun. Or maybe you'll feel led to love someone who's really challenging. That neighbor that drives too fast in the neighborhood, or the coworker who's kind of rude. I don't know who you'll love, but I do know this. If we love God by loving our neighbors, there's a lot of people who are going to experience the love of God this week. And as the circle widens from our family to church to neighbors, the impact of our love can know no bounds. So I wish us all the best as we seek to love everyone by loving our neighbors.